Hello, welcome to this Anchor Community Spotlight. I'm Alan Pope, Director of Developer Relations at Anchor. This week I'm talking to Ken VanDine, a highly experienced staff engineer at Canonical who's been working in open source for many years. More on him in just a moment. If you've not seen these community spotlights before, it's pretty simple. I love talking to our friends in the open source community, especially those that we partner with to improve security tooling for everyone. I also like to discuss projects that consume or leverage our open source libraries and tools such as Sift and Gripe. If you know any projects that I can shine a light on and discuss, please get in touch, let me know. A quick introduction for those who don't know Anchor, Sift and Gripe, those cute little logos in the top right. Anchor sponsors the development of Sift and Gripe with a dedicated team of open source developers. Anchor's been around for nearly 10 years now, and most of the executives have extensive experience of open source, and they wanted to address the challenges of cloud-native security. So while Anchor is the main sponsor of Sift, our SBOM generator, and Gripe, the vulnerability scanner, we also have an enterprise solution that covers the creation, storage, and scanning of SBOMs at scale, vulnerability scanning through the development lifecycle from source to deployment, and malware and secret scanning, and loads more. You can find out more about all of that at anchor.com and learn more about our open source tools at anchor.com/open source. So as I said, I'm talking this week to Ken VanDine, who's a staff engineer at Canonical working on Ubuntu. I've known Ken for nearly 20 years now, and I worked with him at Canonical. So we have a lot of background. It'll be quite a light and jovial conversation between the pair of us. But I wanted to highlight, Ken's written a book, and I've put a link on the screen, and there's a QR code. It gets mentioned in the discussion a little bit later on as well. Ken's a great guy. He has so much knowledge to share, and the book is very comprehensive. So take a look. If you're viewing this before August 2025, then there may well be a discount available on the PackPub link that you can see on screen right now. But we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Let's get into the discussion with Ken. So hello, Ken. Welcome to this little community spotlight we have over here at Anchor. Lovely to see you. I hear you're in a time zone near me.
Yes, I am. Berlin.
Wow, that's quite unusual because you're over in the States mostly, right? So,
yeah.
Company thing?
Yeah, we're here for a sprint this week in Berlin with all my wonderful Ubuntu colleagues.
Nice. Maybe we'll hear a little bit more about that later. So I really wanted to dive in, first of all. Like, you've been in the Linux community for a very long time, like started with Slackware, I think, back in the early 90s, in the previous century, and you founded Foresight Linux. You worked on Ubuntu Desktop for what seems like decades, and I want to know, what was that pivotal moment when you first discovered Linux? What sparks that passion, and that's driven your career, right?
It was really curiosity. You know, when I was a kid, I was always a kid who, instead of playing with my toys, I took them apart to figure out how they worked. And often didn't assemble them correctly. I broke my toys. So I always had to know how things worked. And, when I got into, had my own PC and it was running Windows 3, I was very frustrated because, once I figured out how the hardware worked, I couldn't figure out how the software worked. And it was great timing because, Linux had just been released, a brand new version of it. It wasn't even 1.0 yet. It was like, 0.93 Linux kernel or something like that. But Slackware 1.0 had just been released. So I spent like a month getting Slackware working on my PC. And I just loved taking apart, figuring out how the software worked, going in and tweaking a couple of lines of code here and there. I knew no programming. Did a little bit of basic stuff like when I was in middle school, but it was nothing like, C. But I had to learn a bit. But I loved being able to dive in, find the source code, take it apart, and break it like it would compile. What the hell did I do? And figure out how it all worked, and get it to build and do what I wanted to do. And I've never looked back. I have been fortunate since then. I have actually never worked in an environment where I wasn't able to use Linux on a daily basis.
Wow.
For over 30 years now, which has been fantastic.
Yeah, I'll bet. So what was the part that got you creating your own Linux distro? I guess Foresight was quite early on in your career. Was it a passion project? What was the motivation for doing that?
So Foresight was definitely a passion project, but actually creating custom Linux distros came quite a bit earlier than that. I was a dot-commer in the late '90s, living in the Bay Area. We ran a web hosting firm with thousands and thousands of websites we were hosting, and I built a custom Linux distro that was about 60 megs or so. That had the machines, the servers were all rootless. So they had no disks in them, and we were NFS. We were net booting them and NFS mounting the root file system. So I created a very, very trimmed down, tiny Linux distro. So you could just edit a MAC address in a little table somewhere, and this device, when it booted up, would become a MySQL server. This other device, when it booted up, became an Apache server. And it took its identity. And there were read-only root file systems on the machines. So I started building custom distros very, very early. And then I ultimately went on to manage an HPC effort at a big pharmaceutical company in the US, where I was the architect of their first Linux grid. And it was the same thing. We were building tiny Linux distros that could be provisioned on the fly. This was like in 2001, 2002. So a scientist could say, I need to run this Perl script. I need these dependencies. They'd click a button and it would spin up 800 nodes in some data center somewhere to perform the job that he needed. And then it would tear down at the end.
That's a wild, prescient thing that's exactly what people do these days. Like hit a button and deploy to 1,000 machines, a bespoke application on each one, microservices everywhere. It's like you were there at the start, man.
It was very early. Nobody else was doing these sorts of things yet, but I was fascinated with doing that. Once I started taking apart my first Slackware install and learning my way around, I very quickly just went all in and was learning from the ground up how to build Linux distros. Then later I went to work for RPath, which was a company where we created tooling for building custom Linux distros. Which is where I created Foresight. So, Foresight was a passion project I did in my spare time, but it was a great proving ground for the technology we were creating at RPath. We had our own package manager tool called Canary that we created, which was very much ahead of its time. It's a shame, to see that we were never able to bring it to the world the scale it should have been. But it was amazing stuff, and we were able to build very tiny purpose-built software appliances is what we called, or cloud instances in AWS. We were actually the first distro that you could spin up cloud instances in AWS back then.
Oh wow! I did not know that. I thought AWS came later. Really breaking down walls here.
This was like 2006 timeframe, something like that. Right. So I used the same tools that we used to create these software appliances that were designed for purpose-built machines to build a full-blown GNOME-based desktop. And I was heavily involved in the GNOME project, and I really wanted a way that we can showcase the latest and greatest cool stuff that was happening in GNOME. It was typically something where there'd be a new major GNOME release. 2 months later, you could get it in your favorite distro.
Right.
So I created some automation that would build all the GNOME packages on a regular basis based on the tag. It was back when GNOME was in SVN, Subversion, old school revision control. But we would build all the tagged releases as well as daily builds of trunk in SVN. So we had the daily builds of every GNOME package, latest and greatest, available, and we built installable ISOs as well as virtual machine images using RPath tools. And for a while, this was the GNOME developer kit. So if you went to GNOME.org and downloaded the developer kit, you were downloading this Foresight-based GNOME, bleeding edge version that you could install or boot live on your machine and play around with it. So at any given time, it may be broken, may not be.
So, if anyone's ever looked at that tree of all the Linux distros, I guess Foresight kind of is over there on the left-hand side somewhere. And then there's this big tree of all the others, and one of those being Ubuntu. And you move from working on Foresight to working on Ubuntu. And that's, I think was that 2009 you started working on Ubuntu, right? And so that's a fair while, and like it's moving from like something that clearly was popular and the GNOME people really appreciate it, and then you move to Canonical and start working on Ubuntu. What's the most exciting transformation from going from that to this, and then 15 years of Ubuntu? Like, what's stuck in your mind there?
I think it's really seeing Ubuntu come from this niche OS that passionate hobbyists that wanted to tinker around would install. Linux was hard to install before Ubuntu came around. Ubuntu focused very much on bringing it to the masses, making it easy, point and click to connect to your Wi-Fi, that sort of thing. But still, in the beginning, it was very much that enthusiast that really wanted to learn more about Linux that was installing Ubuntu. But over the years, it's evolved into this. It's a mainstream thing now. I meet people all the time that have used Ubuntu, maybe not as a daily driver, but they've played around with it. Maybe they're running some server application somewhere, doing development, in the cloud, and the backend stuff is all running on Ubuntu. Ubuntu is everywhere now. And seeing that transformation over the years from 2009, where it was this niche thing that there was a select group of people that really cared about it, and now it's everywhere. And it's just been a phenomenal story.
Yeah, I've probably told this story a number of times to a number of people. I once went into my local shop to buy some bits, and I was wearing an Ubuntu T-shirt. It was the Hardy Heron, quite a famous T-shirt from back in the day. And the guy behind the counter was a university student, part-time working in the shop, and he kept looking at me and staring at my T-shirt. And when I got to the front of the line, he said, "Where have I seen that before?" And I looked down and realized what I was wearing, and I said, "Your desktop?" And he went, "Oh, yeah." So it gets everywhere. So spin forward to now, and the latest release of Ubuntu is 24.04, the Noble Numbat, the latest LTS. Anyway, it's quite a major milestone, isn't it? It's got 12 years LTS support, performance improvements, confidential computing, and loads more, I'm sure. And as the former engineering manager at the Ubuntu desktop, you worked on a lot of the things that are shipping in there, and you've also written a book, The Ultimate Ubuntu Handbook, and that covers 24.04, right?
Correct.
What sticks out for you in 24.04?
Well, it's kind of hard to pinpoint just one thing because, as I'm sure each LTS release is a culmination of 2 years worth of work, right, between that and the previous LTS, where we have these interim releases in between. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint one thing because there's so much had changed between 22.04 and 24.04. But really, I think for me, the thing that stands out the most is some of the really new polished things that we brought that we've been working on for the last several cycles. And that's our new installer and the new App Center. They were things that we've been working on for a long time. We've been working on those since before 22.04. They weren't ready for 22.04 yet. We're not going to destabilize an LTS. So we've been working on that stuff long before even 22.04 was released. But they were finally ready. They made it into the interim releases in 23.04 and got the polish and the testing that was necessary in order to ship them in 24.04. So I'm really proud of that. And that was a lot of stuff that was just a lot of hard work from the beginning. The partnership that we created with Google on Flutter, we got involved with Google and their Flutter team back in 2019 to start enabling that to deliver Flutter-based applications to Linux desktop. And we've been working on that all these years, building up to that. And these were some of the goals. These were some of the original things that we wanted to replace in Ubuntu with a very polished experience written in Flutter. So we had to do a bunch of work in the interim there to kind of build the engine up for that and all the components that we needed to build it. But it was finally ready, and we were able to deliver that in 24.04. And I know I'm biased. I think they're really sick. It turned out quite nice.
I agree. I think it's easy to say that Ubiquity, the previous installer, has been around for a long time, and literally you could put anything in front of people and it looks quite a bit better. But Ubiquity stood the test of time and stuck around for a long while, so it must have been pretty challenging to replicate all the different use cases and introduce some new ones for encrypted disks and whatever else, the integration into those installers. I think it's fascinating that Canonical went with Flutter. Like there was a lot of puzzle outside Canonical, I'm sure, but like my favorite music app is MusicPod, and that came out of the Ubuntu community. It's and it's written in Flutter, and I use it every single day. It's quite surprising how you working away on that relationship with Google for Flutter has born multiple very useful, very stable, very reliable projects. It's really good going.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and I think one of the reasons why we chose Flutter, it's not just because we thought we needed a new toolkit on Linux desktop. It's about how do we bring more app developers to the ecosystem. And I love GTK. I've been a GNOME developer for a long time, but there are lots of people out there writing mobile apps in Flutter. There's people writing mobile apps in other languages too. There's, but Flutter was something that we saw, Google had an interest in supporting desktop. They started to build for Windows and for Mac and said they wanted Linux as well. We saw that as a great opportunity for us to kind of, engage there and bring our expertise of the Linux desktop into that team and be able to do that enablement work to allow Flutter apps to run seamlessly on Linux, on the Linux desktop. But then you tap into this ability where you can have anybody who's written a mobile app in Flutter because they were targeting Android and iOS to just, a little bit of work, target desktop form factors as well, Mac, Windows, and Linux, all from the same code base. And by the way, MusicPod works on all of those. I run it on my Android phone every day.
Oh, really? I haven't tried it on mobile yet. I've seen it's got builds for it. I've not tried it yet. I might give it a try.
Yes. Frederick's awesome. I love the guy. I don't know if it might still be published as beta in the Play Store. I installed it a long time ago, and I just get the updates now. I love MusicPod as well. I use it every day. So I use it on my Ubuntu machine, and I use it on my Android phone. And it's the same code base, which is wonderful.
It's wild, isn't it? And it I think a word we used to use was convergence. It adapts to the different size of screen, right? Like I can use it full screen on a laptop or full screen on a phone, and it's great on both, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Nice. So getting those pieces of software, those Flutter applications to people, you mentioned App Center, something that Ubuntu is driving hard on and has been for quite a while now, like 2016, something like that, is snap packages, which is something I've been involved with as well when I previously worked with you at Canonical. It's a kind of a departure from what people might call traditional packaging or the established packaging system. Is there like an easy way to explain what drove that change, the necessity to create something new?
So there's multiple driving forces behind that. I think the most obvious driver behind that is the universal aspect of it, right? I mean, it's pretty tough to convince an app developer or even more importantly, like an ISV, a software company that's publishing their application, to say target Linux. Oh, you need to build that for Ubuntu 18.04, Ubuntu 20.04, Ubuntu 22.04, Fedora, Debian, so it's like an impossible task for them to take on that amount of work to be able to publish every release built for all those different versions in a sustainable way, right? It's so the universal aspect of a snap package where you can choose what base you want to build it on. So it's built on 24.04. If you install that version that's built for 24.04 on Ubuntu 18.04, it works exactly the same as it does on Ubuntu 24.04, as well as the interim releases, 25.04, and other distros as well. I will say, other distro support, sometimes your mileage may vary, the level of confinement might be a little bit different, but you can target with one package many different versions of a Linux distro and even multiple distros. So it's much easier sell to convince an ISV to say, come publish your application for our ecosystem, for our users, when they don't have to do it 50 times, right? They just have to set up, create that artifact in your build pipeline and then spit it out into a snap package and it just works everywhere. So that's the more obvious kind of answer, for a driver there. But there's other less obvious things I think a lot of people don't think about, and a lot of it comes around the trust of the software that you're running. So, one aspect of that is the confinement that we have in the Snap. So you install this application written by a third party. You're not necessarily trusting that application to have full access to everything on your system, maybe be able to replace a shared library that other applications use, or be able to, open up a port that you don't expect, or, a number of things that could happen maliciously.
Like open your webcam or look at your SSH keys.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why does that calculator application need to start my webcam? Right. So you can control that sort of thing. Right. So you can trust it doesn't have access to things it shouldn't have access to. But the other aspect of trust there is you can trust that the application is coming from who you think it's coming from. So, like, for example, Spotify publishes the Spotify Snap. So that is coming from Spotify. You can look in the Snap Store and see that they're a verified publisher. So there's been some vetting from our security team and our Snap Store team to verify that the publisher is who they say they are. And what you're running is the version of Spotify that they've tested, and they said that they want to release to stable. Same is true for like Firefox. Mozilla publishes that, and not all publishers are verified. So there's things in the store published by me. But
me.
you can, and you, yes, there's plenty of stuff published by you. But I think I got you beat now, Alan.
Yes, you do. I looked at your store page, and you certainly have more snaps in the store than I do. Well done. Actually, it's interesting. You mentioned security and verifying where something comes from. There's also the knowing what's inside the snap. Like what is shipping? What are the bits on my machine? And we at Anchor worked with some of the guys on the security team at Canonical to add support for peering into snaps and seeing what's inside them, so we can build an SBOM, a bill of materials, and then pass that to our vulnerability scanner, Gripe, and then we can report on what vulnerabilities we think are public and recognized for all the packages that are inside that snap, which is great because you can use tools that people are already using, Sift and Gripe, and these new packaging systems. I say new, 2016. It's been around a while now, and so it was interesting from my point of view because our developers had to implement a license-compliant decompression algorithm because some of the snaps are compressed with LZO compression. And so we had to implement that in a license-compliant way with the software that we're shipping. But we did. And now Sift and Gripe have support for peering into snap packages, and you can then have confidence that there are no vulnerabilities within the snaps that you're consuming or building. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note, as you know, but many people may not know this, the snap is actually delivered as a squash.fs file. So it's a single read-only immutable file that gets mounted at runtime to represent the entire file system that's available inside the snap. So you can trust that the contents of that hasn't been manipulated, because snapd, if the signature doesn't match, snapd won't even launch the application. So what you're running hasn't been tainted. So you could use your tools to inspect the contents of that snap, and then Snap will ensure that what's being run hasn't been tainted. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
So obviously I have to mention, because we're talking about Linux, and there's quite a bit of diversity in Linux. You mentioned there's lots of different distros, and now we have Snap, and there's Flatpak, and there's AppImage and containers, and they all solve slightly different problems. And I already mentioned, we have some integration with snaps. This diversity, do you see different approaches from these different things coexisting, or is there a unique thing that each one brings that means we have to have them all? How does that work?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'll point out my obvious bias for Snap. I've been involved in the ecosystem for a very long time. But, I feel like, snaps really solve the whole gamut of the things that you need to worry about. The delivery of the software, the trust aspect of what you're running, the confinement, the lifecycle management, like how does it get updated, those sorts of things, as well as, like I said, with the confinement, what it has access to and things like that. Some of the other ones, they don't solve all of those sorts of issues. But in like a Snap world, you can package a desktop application as a Snap, a web service as a Snap, just some sort of a daemon that needs to run in the background that does important things. Maybe you're deploying some application in the cloud. It can just run the service in the cloud and do what you need to do. You can just deploy it as a single Snap. It can be used for kind of the whole gambit. Where Flatpak is, it's got to be a desktop application, and there's some workarounds for that. People bundle, they take like basically a container that runs some application, but they bundle a desktop file with it, which runs the terminal and then runs the app inside the terminal.
Hey, whatever works.
Yeah, exactly. But it's tricking a CLI app or some sort of a service into thinking it's a desktop application. It's
right.
It was designed to solve the problem of delivering desktop applications. Where in the Snap world, we started out kind of targeting like the IoT type use cases and evolved out of that. And the vision was always to be able to kind of service all of these use cases, and we're there now. But some of the other ones have, much more limited scope. And I feel like Snap is just much richer there. It is very heavily used. I know there's debates about what's more popular and what's not. I really think it's more about the community of people that you're talking to. We've got lots of great traction with Snap, and I can see that continuing to evolve.
So one of the things we mentioned earlier is 2404, the LTS, and one of the offerings that Canonical has is Ubuntu Pro, which I guess makes a lot of sense for LTSs because it extends the life cycle of those LTSs. Like typically it's like 5-10 years or something like that, and you can extend that even further. It's like 12 years now, and FIPS compliance and more security patching and like. What feedback are you getting from people who are using this Ubuntu Pro on LTSs in the wild?
Well, it's a variety of feedback because it depends on what they really need it for, right? I mean, the most obvious is the security patching, as you mentioned. Everybody's worried about the security of the software that they're running, right? Making sure that what they're running is getting the necessary security fixes. Whether it's a web browser or TensorFlow or what have you, whatever you're using. One of the interesting things with Pro is it not only gives you longer term support, so beyond that 5-year LTS span, but it gives you that security patching for packages that are in our universe archive. And for people who may not be aware, there's main and universe. Things that are in main is the app repository where the stuff that we officially support for the duration of the LTS lives. Packages that are in the universe repository, which is, I don't know, last I saw like 37,000, something like that,
wow.
Are things that are mostly community supported. There's plenty of Canonical employees that, work on those packages as well, and other Ubuntu developers and Debian developers, et cetera. But with Pro, you actually get security patching for all of that stuff from day one. So it's not only for after that 5 years of the regular LTS, which is particularly interesting these days with AI and data science, because many of the tools that those types of users are leveraging are packages that are in the universe repository. So it's important for these organizations that have large groups of data scientists to make sure that what they're running is supported and security patched. There's other things that have been very successful, like live patch in the kernel, so you can get security fixes for your kernel without rebooting your machine. FIPS and other types of compliance things are very important in some industries. They're necessities in places. Back to the security patching, there's actually a new requirement now in the European Union called the Cyber Resilience Act, which requires devices that are sold to have updates available for a certain number of years after the last device is sold with that version of the software. I think it's 5 years. So,
wow.
Or maybe 7 years. I can't remember now exactly. It's called the Cyber Resilience Act. Check it out. But there's actually a requirement saying if you buy a machine and it has an operating system on it, that from the time you buy it, you have a certain amount of years of support. So the OEMs can sell the machine with Pro to ensure that it comes with the support necessary.
It's wild. There's a couple of things I want to mention here. It's wild that you're like talking about OEMs shipping with Ubuntu. You know, back in the when we've gone from the early days of Ubuntu when it was an ISO that you download or a CD that you were handing out, and now it's like, you know, the laptop behind me that's running Ubuntu shipped with Ubuntu on it. It came with it out of the box. It's quite amazing. You mentioned the Cyber Resilience Act. So that's something that's very dear to our hearts at Anchor, because one of the things that it mandates, as I understand it, not a lawyer, is that you need to have an SBOM for the software you're shipping, a bill of materials. And so, you know, that's our bread and butter, using SIFT and Gripe to generate SBOMs and your vulnerability reports. Or if you're an enterprise, being able to put those SBOMs in an enterprise system that can keep up to date with all the vulnerabilities and tell you if any of your containers are vulnerable or if any of your systems are vulnerable. It's interesting times that we're getting these legal compliance things from the EU for sure.
Yeah, and what's great about it is it's really to protect the consumer, right? No longer are you going to buy your Android phone and a year later you don't get security updates on your phone, right? They're really there to protect those consumers. So it's now filtering out into many spaces, and we're seeing that now with desktop Linux even, which is pretty cool.
And how do you balance that? You're doing desktop development. You've got security hardening that's looming, that someone's telling you have to do. But there's also the user experience that has to be present. You can't keep punching them in the face with dialogues or forcing them to type complicated keys and things like that. You degrade the user experience. How does the broader ecosystem deal with that?
Yeah, so there's obviously different ways people use their Linux machines. I do believe that desktop workloads are different requirements than data center workloads, right? But it shouldn't mean you have to compromise, right? Like your application shouldn't be slower because it's more secure, or it shouldn't be harder to use. So we have our stance within Ubuntu, and it's always been this way, is to be secure by default. So on a desktop, you install Ubuntu desktop on a brand new machine. There's no services running by default with an open port. That's been our stance from the beginning. So none of that sort of thing has changed. We do always have to try to balance, as we're implementing new features that are, going to make confinement better, that sort of thing. We got to make sure it doesn't get in the way of how you use your computer. We shouldn't make you have to drop to a command line and type some command in order to be able to use your webcam, right? If you're in Firefox and you want to join a meeting, your webcam should work. So we have that mechanism in Snaps to say Firefox is an application that should have access to your camera. As a user, you can disable that, but we do allow it by default to be able to access your webcam. But you have the ability to disconnect that. But we try to balance it to that extent. We don't want it to by default just not work, and then you have to figure out how to make it work. So yeah, like you said, it's a balancing act.
Yeah. So looking towards the future, which given we've already looked at the past, we've seen recently reports that the Linux desktop adoption has reached the giddy heights of 5%. I know. Who would have thought? And it's climbing. And, we've got things like Valve with the Steam Deck, there's success there, and other gaming developments. What trends are you excited about? What's going to be something that you feel you can capitalize on in Canonical with Ubuntu?
Well, as I mentioned before with AI and data science, I feel like those are some pretty big drivers right now. I don't think there's any one driver that's driving us up to that. It's not only that we just topped 5%, it's like in 2023, we were like 2.7% or something. I mean,
oh, wow.
We've nearly doubled in a couple years. Yeah, if you look at the trends, it's grown significantly recently.
That's a lot of Steam Decks, isn't it? That's a lot of people playing on planes, isn't it?
But I don't think there's any one thing that's driving it, right? I do think that, for example, the work that Valve's done with the Steam Deck to bring more and more gaming titles to work on Linux, because I will say, yes, anything that works on Steam Deck should work perfectly fine on an Ubuntu desktop with Steam installed from the Snap Store.
Right.
If it says it works on your Steam Deck, it should work on your Ubuntu desktop. But I think that is definitely part of it. The other part of it is people who are doing things like AI development, data science, machine learning types of things. Ubuntu or Linux in general is kind of the incumbent there. Like nobody's doing that sort of thing, or very few people is doing that sort of thing on, say, a Windows machine. So there are already Linux users that need that to do that type of work. Historically, though, somebody needed to do that sort of work. Maybe they would spin up a VM to do it in, or dual boot their machine, but then reboot into Windows in the evening when they want to play their video games. So things like the work that Valve's done to bring more gaming to Linux, and this increased demand for more and more people running Linux on their desktops to do their regular work means people spend more time on their Linux desktop. So I think these things are kind of coming together as kind of like the perfect storm for us. I'm not going to say the year of the Linux desktop,
Oh, you've spoiled it now. I've just stopped recording. Cancel the video. The other thing is that WSL, even the people who are using Windows, there's WSL. They can run Ubuntu inside a little window on their Windows desktop while they're playing Solitaire or whatever it is people do on Windows. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and in WSL, you can snap install GNOME Calculator, and you know what? A GNOME Calculator icon pops up in your start menu in Windows. And you can click on that icon, and it launches GNOME Calculator from your Ubuntu WSL instance. The integration is fantastic in WSL, and that's really opened up Ubuntu to many, many, many more users, which has been great.
Yeah, it's pretty wild how popular that's become. When we see how many people are using, the millions of people who are using Ubuntu on the desktop and in the cloud, and then you look at the many more millions of people who are using Windows, and all they've got to do is install WSL, and magically they've got Linux right in front of them. It's like a Trojan horse on their Windows machine. It's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, and it's been great. And in my current role, so you mentioned I was a former engineering manager for Ubuntu Desktop. I've been involved with Ubuntu Desktop since I joined Canonical, but recently I've moved over to work with our PC OEM partners. So I work very closely with the OEMs that ship Ubuntu preloaded, and they also participate in the Ubuntu Certified program, where they take devices that they want to get certified for customers to be able to buy and ensure that Ubuntu will run on those. And it's been a very exciting time to see, working with these partners, the growth, the demand, more and more platforms they want to see certified for Ubuntu. And I think it's, these types of use cases that are driving quite a bit of that.
When you say more and more platforms, is it like, just a variety of laptops or a variety of desktops, or is it certifying like AI workstations with like a bunch of NVIDIA cards? What kind of things, like, what are the secrets, Ken? Tell us the secrets. What can we buy?
Well, I can't tell you secrets, but I will tell you all of the above.
Right,
you can go to any of those OEM partner websites and find Ubuntu machines. You can check out Ubuntu's website. We have a page where you can search for all the devices that have been certified with Ubuntu. And those devices that get certified with Ubuntu, we do regular regression testing as well for those partners. But again, they're adding more and more. There's more and more demand, so there's more variety of machines that they want to get certified. And some of those are like AI workstations with lots of GPUs.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we've kind of touched on a little bit is balancing that stability for millions of users, but while also pushing the envelope. Like, it's all very well people using LTS, but sometimes Canonical can push things a little bit hard, like the delivery of some pieces of software maybe a little bit earlier than some other distros, or maybe a little bit earlier than the developers might think is appropriate. That can happen, but I think that's where they're pushing the envelope. How do you balance that, pushing the envelope while also keeping it steady the ship on LTSs?
Yeah, so I would say it's really not a balancing exercise at all. We focus, very, very heavily on stability for our LTS releases. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been working towards our new installer for a long time, the new App Center for a long time. Those things spanned more than, an LTS cycle. We take the opportunity to land some of these new, more aggressive things that we're working on in our interim releases, but we'll do it at a timely point, like perhaps the first interim release after an LTS. So we have several cycles to polish and get lots of testing and potentially revert something before the next LTS.
Right. So for those people who don't know,
necessary.
there's 3 releases between one LTS and the next, which come out every 2 years in April, right?
Yes, and the LTS gets 5 years of support, but it comes with they happen every 2 years. The interim releases happen every 6 months in between, and they only get 9 months of support. So if you want that kind of bleeding edge, and you're not too worried about the long-term support, you can stay on those interim releases and just update between those. And see all the latest and greatest cool things that we're doing. But we're less risk adverse, in those interim releases. So that's our opportunity to land that new shiny thing that needs more testing. And we do rely on our users to be able to provide bug reports and those sorts of things in that time to make sure that it's ready for that next LTS.
Right.
And we will not release it in the next LTS if we feel like there is a stability risk, because that is our first and foremost promise with the LTS.
Yeah, there's a significant percentage of Ubuntu users who are sticky on those LTSs, and sometimes they don't even upgrade from one LTS to the next. They leave it a good few years, and that's a testament to the stability of an LTS. If you can keep it installed, then why would you not? I'm sure there are still people out there with 1404 and even older LTSs out there.
There are.
So speaking of shiny things, you've written a book, The Ultimate Ubuntu Handbook, and you're probably one of the best placed people to write a book like this. It's like 400 pages or something, and it's got everything from basic installation to advanced security, development workflows, loads of stuff. What can readers get from your book that they couldn't put together from asking an AI or a load of random internet articles or blogs or that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I focused on things that I have opinions about. There's a lot of the things that you would expect, how do you do this or that, types of things in the book. But I did focus on trying to cover things that, from when I talk to people, that I'm a little surprised that they don't necessarily understand. So I talked about that, and I have some things in there on my recommended workflows, like using containers to do your development. Don't ever install a database server on your laptop.
Oops.
do that sort of thing in a container that you can start and stop when you want. Don't taint your entire system. Those types of things. How to manage virtual machines. Maybe create your own little mini cloud where you have multiple nodes. Using multipass, which has great Ubuntu integration for managing these multiple virtual machines. So you can create your own, simulated cloud in virtual machines on your own laptop to do your development in a way that's very similar to how you will ultimately deploy your applications.
So the interesting thing for me is you came from this background of Foresight Linux, where you were talking about deploying applications, and then you shifted into desktop, and now you're talking about doing development, and you're talking about Kubernetes, security hardening, and that goes beyond the normal desktop guide. Who's the target audience? Who are you aiming this book at?
Yeah, so when Packet, the publisher, approached me and wanted me to narrow down my target audience, I really struggled a lot because I do see people using Ubuntu desktop in many, many ways. You don't really deploy production web services on an Ubuntu desktop, but many of our users are developers. And they have different workflows, and types of needs, for their own development. And I see people all the time that I talk to that are, for example, installing a database server on their machine that opens up a report and a port on their machine to the network, and then they're in the coffee shop talking to me on their public Wi-Fi. It kind of makes me cringe a little bit. It's there's much better ways to do this. So there's those types of things, and other things that I hear from people that I talk to. They don't necessarily understand a lot of the things that we at Canonical take for granted, some of the intricacies to our release cycles and why we have the cadence that we have. Those kinds of things. Internally, we're kind of numb to it. We talk in our own lingo, and I think we're not great at always communicating these sorts of things to the masses. So I kind of took this opportunity to target all of those people who may not understand those types of things. So if there's a little bit in here for everybody, and you don't have to read every chapter. It's not the kind of book you're going to read, front to back. You're going to grab the chapters that are interesting to you. Hopefully you'll read all of them, but you may just read this chapter and that chapter because you're really focused on how can you run your own little mini cloud on your machine. But you also want to learn about our release cycle so you understand what to expect, when to expect new versions of things. So you can pick the chapters that you really care about. So I took the opportunity basically to kind of, I'll say, get on my soapbox a little bit on my opinions of kind of the best workflows for a number of things, while also targeting things to make your system more secure. Like, I'm a firm believer people should be using encryption for their disks. What happens if your laptop gets stolen? These are important things that I think a lot of users overlook because it's not the default option in the installer. So I tried to touch on those sorts of things and some ways to kind of see if your machine maybe has been compromised. There's stuff in there about running check rootkit, those kinds of things. I don't focus a lot on those types of topics, but there's little tidbits here and there that could be useful to people that they may not have seen before. And even if they have seen it before, you'll be seeing my perspective on it because, like I said, I have my opinions.
Yeah, so what I get from that is you're talking about like all the knowledge that there is amassed inside Canonical. Sometimes you don't appreciate what people don't know. So I guess your target audience is everyone who doesn't work for Canonical, right? It's quite a sizable set of people. Yeah. Well, it's been lovely chatting to you, Ken, and lovely catching up because I haven't seen you for a very long time. It's been lovely to hear about all the new stuff that's going on over at Canonical. Thank you for spending some time with us. Are there any final thoughts you have, anything you wanted to mention, where people can find out more about what you've been talking about?
Yeah, well, one huge oversight is I didn't thank you for writing the foreword for my book. So you guys should know, Alan wrote the foreword.
Yes, I did. Yes. Yeah, I hope that contributes in some small way to your book's success.
So thank you very much for that, Alan. I really do appreciate it. We're going to have a link up here where you can find the book as well as a discount code that's good until it ships on August 1st. So pre-orders that are ordered between now and August 1st, there's a 10% off code that we'll provide here as well.
Sweet. I'll put that on the screen and put it in the description under this video. Thanks again, Ken. Enjoy the rest of the sprint, although you're in Berlin now, so I guess it's beer o'clock. I'll see you again soon. Take care, mate.
Thank you.